Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
The Unification Church, or the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, is a religious movement founded in 1954. The movement was founded by Mun Yong Myung, known today as Reverend Sun Myung Moon. Originating out of South Korea, the church is known for its mass weddings, anti-communistic ideologies, and unique Christian teachings. This church movement has also been dubbed the Moonies, though many would later find this term insulting. The research for this episode took me down a rabbit hole, and the twists and turns within this story sound almost fictional. Moon teaches followers that the world is created from God's inner nature, which is reflected in the dual expressions of Sung San, meaning casual masculine, and Hyung Sang, resultant feminine. Moon believes the purpose of creation is to experience love. Adam and Eve failed in this task by having sexual intercourse without marriage, and in the wake of their failure, selfish love has dominated human life. Moon teaches that God has sought to restore his plan through various messiahs on earth, but these messiahs have been thwarted. Jesus was almost successful as he created the correct conditions for human spiritual salvation. However, he did not marry, and so he did not complete God's plan. The Unification Church identifies Moon as the Messiah who can fulfill God's plan and bring God's love to all of his followers. The church teaches that the formation of an ideal family, which is one blessed by God through Reverend Moon, can be joyful. A husband and wife who are tied together through God's love are an absolute couple, a unique and unchanging and eternal couple. The ideal is that a family realm of 3 generations connected by God's love is a true family, fulfilling God's plan. When such a family is expanded to a tribe, a people, or a nation, then it becomes the kingdom of heaven on earth, and the kingdom of heaven in heaven. The ideal family is a place of eternal love of the true parents, Reverend and Mrs. Moon. It is the eternal love of husband and wife and the eternal love of their children, and all of this love together, that is centered upon God. An ideal family must be husband, wife, and children. Such a family can be the site of happiness for God. The divine principle teachings are: 1. God is all-powerful and knowing, but is humanized because he is not complete without the reciprocal love of his children. 2. God's original plan was that all men and women are to be sons and daughters of God, just as Jesus was pure and divine. But Adam and Eve sullied this plan. The Unification Church can deliver its people from evil, the evil being impure love, Satan and communism, by offering mass weddings that have the love of God bestowed upon each union. 3. All men and women should become messiahs of God, become one with God in body and mind. And 4. God's work in history is to establish a God-centered family that will create the foothold to turn the evil world into God's vision. So to summarise, Adam and Eve carried out the original sin, which was sex outside of marriage, and because of this, anyone born from Adam and Eve is born into sin. However, Moon can offer you a life free from sin by performing mass wedding ceremonies, purifying those being offered his blessing through marriage, because he is the Holy Son and the Messiah of God. And so through his blessing, you can be reborn without sin. This is what Moon began teaching in Korea, and it's still what is taught today within this religion. So how did this multi-billion-dollar empire come to be such an influential part of thousands of people's lives? Let me take you through the timeline of Reverend Sun Myung Moon, charismatic leader of the Unification Church. Moon, born in 1920 in a small part of South Korea, was raised in a Presbyterian church. Moon studied the Bible and taught Sunday school, and at 16, he talked of how he had a vision of Jesus. And by 1946, Moon was excommunicated from his church after preaching that he had, quote, a special mission on earth, and that he must, quote, go to Japan and to America so that I can let the world know the greatness of the Korean people. After his middle school graduation, Moon moved to Japan. During his time here, Moon talks of how he suffered for the cause. He says, quote, I don't even remember the number of times I was taken into custody by police, beaten and locked in a cell. Even under the worst torture, however, I refused to give them the information they sought. After a while, Moon moved back to Korea and began his preaching again. Not long after this, he was arrested for being a spy, and also for disturbing social order and being accused of polygamy. Moon married his first wife. She was 19 when she was introduced to Moon. They had a son. They named him Sung Jin Moon. He was born on April 9, 1946. It later became known that Moon and his first wife divorced on January 8, 1957, and this was on the grounds that the Unification Church had been using a Picarium doctrine, which means a ceremony to restore the blood lineage through ritual sex. Moon's second wife was Mrs. Kim Chong-hwa. At this time of marriage, it came to light that Kim already had a husband, and it was Kim herself who was involved in the Picarium doctrine. Because of this, Moon faced charges of bigamy. This is inevitably what would lead to Moon's arrest on February 22, 1948, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Kim Chong-hwa would serve part of that sentence alongside of him. He was ordered to spend 5 years in a labour camp in 1948. He said, quote, in prison, the authorities beat me endlessly and demanded that I confess my crimes. Even as I was vomiting blood and seemed on the verge of death, I never let myself lose consciousness. I prayed with confidence. God, don't worry about me. Sun Myung Moon is not dead yet. I won't let myself die in such miserable circumstances as this. And I was right. End quote. During Moon's stay in the labour camp, only a day before his execution, the Korean War broke out and Moon claims that USA attacked the labour camp. He alleges, quote, the high walls around the prison began to fall. At around 2 o'clock in the morning the next day, I walked calmly out of prison with dignity. Although other sources suggested that Moon was simply released from prison, this is when Moon started his movement in South Korea. It's reported that his first dwelling actually had a roof made of ration boxes. A spokesperson for the church said, quote, Korea was terribly poor, so they decided to do business to create revenue and support the mission work of his church. In the early days, they would paint pictures of US servicemen and their families and sell them to earn funds. The third wife of Moon was Miss Kim Pyung-hee. They married around June 30 of 1955, and she gave birth to Hee Jin Moon on August 17, 1955. If the timeline is correct, this would suggest that she was pregnant before they married. In 1968, Moon founded the International Federation for Victory Over Communism, which was reported to have around 4 million members at one point within South Korea. In 1969, Moon's son Hee Jin Moon would die in a train accident. This happened as the train approached Mapo Station in the Cheongbuk province on August 1, 1969. Mr. Moon's fourth wife, Mrs. Choi Won-bok, was called the Great Mother within the Unification Church. She joined the church in 1954 and has also been known as Second Mother. Moon's fifth wife, and the current chairperson of the Unification Church, Hak Ja-hun. She bore 14 children with Moon, but 4 of them have died. Sources suggest that there is one more woman. She was, so to speak, sort of like Moon's sixth wife. And through the Picarium doctrine, the ceremony to restore blood lineage, she conceived and gave birth to Samuel Park, who was born on January 28, 1966, and is known famously as one of Moon's illegitimate sons. Moon defended himself whenever he had been caught cheating outside of his marriage by declaring that he was cleansing the wombs of the women that he slept with. But it's Hak Ja Hun who is seen as the true Mother of Earth, the one woman who stood beside Reverend Moon at the mass weddings, offering her blessing as the true mother of humankind, the one who was posed in family photos and portraits. And so, Moon married and raised the ideal family. Moon says, "Do as I have done and help establish God's kingdom on earth." And according to the Unification Church, to do this is to have your marriage blessed by Moon, and so by God, at one of his mass ceremonies. Church members regard Reverend and Mrs. Moon as the true parents of humankind, and those that are married by them are believed by the church members to be true children linked to God through Moon himself. In 1973, Moon moved the headquarters of the Unification Church to New York, to an 18-acre property in Irvington on Sunnyside Lane that reportedly cost $500,000. On July 18, 1973, Moon's son, Sung Jin, married Kim Dong-suk, the daughter of Kim Won-pil, an important Unification Church member. Kim Dong-suk was born January 30, 1955, and there have been many reports that Moon was actually her father. She was listed as a true child when she visited Moon in 2012, and she could only be listed as a true child if Moon was her biological father. This would suggest an incestuous marriage between his son and illegitimate daughter. It was during this time that the church was suddenly being accused of being a cult. Parents began protesting and asked for help from deprogrammers, and were filing civil lawsuits and having congressional hearings. This wouldn't be the last time the movement would make the headlines from being labelled as a cult. In 1978, there would be the tragedy of Jonestown and the People's Temple to add to cult hysteria. This accusation was only solidified by Stephen Hassan, ex-Unification Church leader who became a member in the 1970s at age 19, but left after almost 3 years and began describing to the world that recruitment into the church has, quote, unethical use of powerful psychological influence techniques by members of the church. Hassan is now an American mental health counsellor and runs a centre for victims of cult mind control and is one of the world's leading experts on cults. He released his most famous text in 1988 called Combating Mind Control, and still releases new texts to this day. In 1982, Moon founded the newspaper The Washington Times. Alongside this, other outlets were created and sponsored to spread the word of the church and preach the views of Reverend Moon. And in this year, Moon was convicted of tax evasion. His followers called his trial religious persecution. He was fined $25,000 and spent 18 months in jail. In the late 1980s, Moon reported that the Japanese Red Army were plotting to kill him. Around this time, Moon began talks with North Korean leader Kim Il-sung. This is ironic given that the Unification Church has very anti-communistic views, and Moon had founded the International Federation for Victory Over Communism. Nevertheless, Moon went on to say, quote, "We were like brothers, meeting for the first time after a long separation." He believes he stopped the war between North and South Korea with these meetings and also stopped the USA getting involved. In the early 1990s, there was a treaty signed, and Reverend Moon was even allowed to open a motor business and a successful hotel in North Korea. He also built a church there, and it is estimated that these conquests would invest $50 million into North Korea. Despite having a threat against his life, and having his church labelled as a cult, this did nothing to stop or slow Moon, who soon expanded further around the world. In the 1990s, the expansive Intonation program launched, and in 1994, on the 40th anniversary of the beginning of the Unification Church, Moon announces the launch, or rather the renaming of the Unification Church, to the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, or FFWPU for short. It is announced that FFWPU has a vision of creating a peaceful world through true families where 3 generations come together as one under the ideal God. Now that the movement was beginning to pick up followers across the globe, people began to worry more, and the word cult came up more often. At this time, there was an anti-cult hysteria due to the 1995 Tokyo subway bombing, carried out by members of a Japanese doomsday cult named Aum Shinrikyo, which can be translated in English to Supreme Truth. This cult was founded by Shoko Asahara in 1984, and in 1994, the group carried out its first sarin gas attack.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
In 1995, the cult would become infamous for another sarin attack, but this time a deadly attack on a Tokyo subway train. Aum Shinrikyo, which labelled itself a religion of truth, coordinated attacks on 3 subway lines during Tokyo's rush hour. This attack killed 13 people, severely injured 50 people, which later resulted in some fatalities, and caused around 1,000 other victims to have temporary visual impairment. This caused widespread anti-cult hysteria to spread through Asia in the 90s, and the Unification Church did not go unnoticed during these times. In 1998, Moon's daughter-in-law, Nan Suk Hong, released a candid autobiographical exposé on her time with the Unification Church. It was titled, In the Shadow of the Moons, My Life in Reverend Sun Myung Moon's Family. I found an extensive interview on a website called The Tragedy of the Six Marys, where Nan Suk is interviewed and offers lots of in-depth information on the church. I've provided a link in the description for anyone who is interested in reading. In this interview, Nan Suk explains she was married to Moon's son at the age of 15 on January the 7th, 1982. The age of consent was 17 in New York State and still is today, but this did nothing to stop the arranged marriage. Nan Suk escaped her volatile and abusive husband in August 1995, making her daring retreat through Moon's estate via the East Garden. Nan Suk talks in her book of the serious drug habit that Hyo-jin Moon had developed. She speaks of him almost always using cocaine and drinking huge amounts of alcohol. She talks of how these habits were funded, and that Mrs. Moon would apparently fund and enable her son. She would give him $1,000 to $5,000 of church donations to buy cocaine, have big parties, go bar hopping, and keep mistresses. When Nan Suk approached Reverend Moon about this, he admitted that he was aware of the mistresses and the affairs, and he told Nan Suk that God wanted him to, and that his son has, quote, God's mission to fulfill. Nan Suk speaks of how later that day he would preach to his people that adultery is a sin, that it is the worst sin, and that you will burn in hell forever if you complete this sin. It has also been reported that Hyo-jin Moon used church money to buy 60 guns that he kept in their bedroom. Nan Suk explains how a gifted submachine gun from his parents was actually kept under their bed. Nan Suk speaks of how her husband beat her repeatedly, even when she was pregnant with their 5th child. One day during this pregnancy, Nan Suk decided to confront Hyo-jin about his terrible drug habit. She grabbed his cocaine supply and flushed it down the toilet. Hyo-jin proceeded to beat Nan Suk so badly that she had black eyes and a bloody nose. She was 7 months pregnant at the time, and she said that Hyo-jin would say, "I'm going to kill the baby." Reverend and Mrs. Moon blamed Nan Suk for this, saying it was her fate to endure these experiences. Reverend Moon's estranged daughter, Eun-jin, has backed all of Nan Suk's allegations, commenting that this sounds, quote, familiar. She talks of how she was also beaten by her husband, and that her parents told her she deserved it. Eun-jin now speaks publicly, attempting to dissuade people from joining the church, saying that Moon is not the Messiah, saying, quote, "He is just my father. I think that in itself should say a lot," end quote. So one night while her husband was locked in the bathroom after taking lots of cocaine, Nansuk hustled 5 kids into a minivan, covered them in blankets, and escaped. Nansuk talks of how she had to learn to cook and clean and learn basic life skills after being married at such a young age into such a rich and powerful family. She talks of being extremely proud of her children. And Nansuk, at the age of 32, was working herself at a centre for helping battered women. Nansuk filed for divorce in 1996, and the divorce was final by 1997. Nansuk was given custody of their children. Her ex-husband would be allowed to see the children on the condition that he passed drug tests. He failed these tests. Hyojin was told by the courts to pay $600,000 to Nansuk and $9,000 a month in child support. No doubt this money would also come from church donations. Hyojin went on to break a court order that prohibited contact with his wife and kids by sending a Christmas parcel to the house, despite having a restraining order against him. Terrified, Nansuk said, quote, "If he wants to get to me, he can. He has so much power." These allegations have also been backed by ex-church member Donna Orme Collins. Collins was the first Western child to be born into the church. Her parents actually set up the church in her area, and she grew up believing that Reverend Moon was in fact the Messiah. An ex-member has said, quote, "And so when Moon marries more than 1,000 couples at once, as he did in New York last June, he exhorts them to live the moral high life that he supposedly exemplifies. The church told us that Moon himself had matched each couple by studying their pictures and brief biographies, and the newlyweds say that their families want them to be as virtuous as his. Moon has 13 children in total. Eunjin explains that Moon's 5 youngest don't speak much Korean. Moon doesn't actually see his family much. The friendly, warm family photos and family-driven sermons are a lie." Eunjin also confirmed that rumours that Reverend Moon has an illegitimate son named Sam Park who was born in 1996 are true, and that when the rumours of this circulated, members left the church. Upon further research, we already know that sources suggest that Moon had a total of 5 wives and a number of illegitimate children. Going back to the article on the website The Tragedy of the Six Marys, the article starts by telling us that 4 of the 14 children that were born by Hak have died in accidental deaths, but that the remaining children leave unfortunate lives, filled with psychosis, drug addiction and sex mania. In 2004, there was a coronation ceremony in an office building of the US Senate, where Representative Danny K. Davis crowned Reverend Moon as the King of Peace. Many other congressmen and women were present, many claiming afterwards that they did not realise it was a coronation. This celebration came after the Tear Crosses Down movement came to an end. This movement consisted of the removal of Christian crosses from over 300 churches in poor neighbourhoods in America. This was due to Moon considering the cross to be a barrier that was preventing the religious uniting under his leadership. Soon after this, a video was released by Moon's movement called Era of Eternal Peace Kingdom, One Global Family Under God. In 2009, 20,000 couples mass married. These marriages are arranged by Moon, and he believes that they must be arranged because Moon rejects romantic love. Moon published an autobiography titled As a Peace-Loving Global Citizen, which was released in English in 2010. On the 3rd of September 2012, aged 92, Moon died. He left behind The Exposition of the Divine Principle, a reinterpretation of the Bible considered Holy Scripture by his church followers. He also left behind an empire that Forbes estimated in 2010 was worth $1.5 billion. This empire includes, and has included, the largest sushi provider in the US, a gun company that Moon started in the 60s where he would encourage members to buy arms because of an impending uprising, a motor company, many successful hotels, the Washington Times, the list just goes on. Ex-members speak out about how the recruitment and indoctrination process works, how the church has become this big. Stephen Hassan told Vice and The Guardian that, quote, "The deprogrammers were making comparisons with Hitler and Moon, and I said, I don't care if Moon is like Hitler, I've chosen to follow him and I'll follow him to the end." The worldview of a member of the Moonies was very us versus them. We are the chosen, we are the elite, we are going to take over the world. Only Korean will be spoken, all other religions will be abolished. I was 19, I was going to graduate. I was going to be a poetry writer, but my girlfriend dumped me and I was lonely. 3 women flirted with me, and I remember asking at one point, "Are you part of a religious group?" And they said, "Oh no, not at all." They invited me over for dinner, and they said, "Hey, we are going away for a weekend and you have to come." I was very naive and trusting, and everyone was smiling and sincere and warm, and I was not getting that this was a cult, and this is how they operate. Little did I know, within a few weeks, I would be told to drop out of school, donate my bank account, look at Moon as my true parent, and believe my parents were Satan. I didn't even believe in Satan until I met this group. End quote. Teddy Hose, a former Moonies cult member, spoke in the Explained documentary titled Cults, saying, quote, "Every Sunday morning at 5 a.m, we just bowed to a picture of Reverend and Mrs. Moon. We were told to love Reverend and Mrs. Moon as our own parents, but even more than our own parents. They would have Sung Myung Moon and or his family members come out. 'Ladies and gentlemen, the true parents of mankind, Reverend and Sung Myung Moon.'" Hassan continued to speak in his interviews, saying, quote, "I hadn't heard of the Moonies. I didn't know about Moon himself until several weeks into my indoctrination. These new people picked me up on a Friday evening and drove me to a very expensive mansion, which turned out to be one of their headquarters. As we were driving through the gate, they said, 'By the way, we're having a joint workshop with the Unification Church.' I said nobody told me about a workshop or a church. They did the classic mind control technique. They turned it around and made it my issue. Why? What's the matter? Are you close-minded?" I was put in a dormitory and couldn't sleep. I was planning to get out of there the next day, but morning came, and I was told I missed the van. They said I would regret it for the rest of my life if I didn't stay, and talked me into a 40-day separation where I shouldn't communicate with my friends or family.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Eventually, Stephen Hassan would meet Moon, and he remembers being asked what country he would like to run when the church takes over the world. This is similar to Teddy Hose talking about indoctrination of the church. He says, quote, "We'd encourage them to go on this retreat centre in the woods, where we can further indoctrinate them." When Stephen Hassan talks about the different roles that cult members had, he said there was a lot of recruiting or fundraising or political activising. They were the 3 main roles, I would say. I was there for 2.5 years, but I was made a leader, and that was part of the allure, I guess. My last job in the cult, I was a fundraising captain in Baltimore, and we were selling flowers on street corners. Everyone on my team had to make at least $100 a day, otherwise they weren't allowed to sleep. I would never ask my members to do what I wouldn't do myself, so while I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night normally, now I wasn't sleeping at all, and it lasted 3 days, and I fell asleep at the wheel of a van. Woke up as I was driving into the back of a tractor-trailer truck at 80 miles an hour or so. That accident put me away from the group for a few weeks, sleeping, eating away from the constant indoctrination, which led to me reaching out to my sister, who was the only person who hadn't said that I'd been brainwashed and that I was in a cult. So she lured me to her house. She did tell my parents, who had been wanting to help me and find me. As soon as I woke up, I wanted to get all of the people out that I had recruited. Naturally, I felt ashamed, embarrassed and guilty. I reached out to them. No one wants to talk to me. It took me months to admit I was in a cult and speak out publicly. It took me a year to be able to kiss a woman and not have the indoctrination in my head. It was very traumatic. I believe there are positive religions and that spiritual experience is a great thing if you know what you are getting into. If people are allowed to leave, if people are allowed to read what they want and talk to whoever they want to. Nobody joins a cult and isn't deceptively recruited. Citizens of the world look at someone in a cult and say there is something wrong with them, they are weak, they are stupid, instead of going, wow, there is a very systematic mind control regime that was implemented on them and they just didn't understand what was happening. And so they got programmed. They use deceptive recruitment so people don't know what is happening to them. Thought stopping, loaded language, totalist black and white ideology, these are universal techniques. Teddy Hose in his interview goes on to say, whenever some young Moo needed my parents for some kind of mission or anything, they had to put the cult leader's needs before their children. Like my father, he was gone most of the year when I was growing up. And in an interview Hose did with the Genuinely Interested podcast, he added that one lady donated 600 million yen to the Unification Church, which is the equivalent of $5.5 million US. He talks of how the New Yorker Hotel is owned by the Unification Church and is the place where Nikola Tesla died. He comments on his childhood being one of church on Sundays and living a well-off life, while other church members pledged their lives to fundraise for the cause, trying to climb the ranks within the church for position of power. He comments about how he remembers Hung Jin Moon, or Philip being his English name, wandering around the town, looking melancholy, and eventually Philip took his own life. A letter was sent out the next day from the church. The letter was from Moon himself, and he was blaming his followers, saying that the death of his son was their fault, that they caused this. And this is when Hose decided to leave the church behind. If we use Stephen Hassan's BITE model of behaviour, information, thought and emotional control, we can see the clear outline of what looks to be a cult. Behaviour control includes modifying behaviour with rewards. This is seen when members are willing to work long hours without sleep to fundraise, which will lead to them climbing the ranks within the church. Another form of behaviour control is to restrict or control sexuality. This is done by suggesting anyone outside of the church is living in sin, and so being with them sexually would mean you are also living in sin. Hassan talks of how he was deprived of his 7 to 9 hours sleep. He was only getting 3 to 4 hours, and eventually he wasn't getting any. With information control, this cult behaviour can be seen with the insider versus outsider doctrine, that anyone outside of the church is sinful, and that communists are doing Satan's work on earth. With thought control, there is a clear sense of black versus white, us versus them, and good versus evil being instilled, as again anyone outside of the church is a sinner and will not be entered into God's kingdom on earth. With emotional control, there is irrational fear being instilled by suggesting people take up arms for the impending uprising. Showering potential new members with praise and attention, also known as love bombing. Teaching that there is no happiness or peace outside of the church is done by suggesting members who are not in the church cannot be showered with God's love. All in all, I would ascertain that this church movement scores a heavy 24 on the cult bite scale, meaning that members could potentially end up with PTSD or severe trauma from being part of this movement. Today, the Unification Church is implemented in over 100 countries. There are several denominations of this movement that have branched off since Moon's death, including one named the Professors World Peace Academy and the International Conference on the Unity of Sciences. Mrs. Moon is now considered the Messiah and is still seen as the mother of humankind. She founded the Women's Federation for World Peace International. Moon's son leads a faction called Family Peace Association, and one of his youngest sons started a branch movement called Sanctuary Church. On February 28, 2018, the Sanctuary Church held a special blessing ceremony where members were asked to bring bullet crowns and a rod of iron, which is also known as an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. If members couldn't get hold of this firearm, or the equivalent to this firearm, they were to go to a gun store and get an extremely expensive gift card to represent their ability and willingness to protect the Sanctuary Church and its community, which prides itself on being a nation of cosmic peace and unity, a universal group of individuals aspiring to build a world centered on principles of true love and true service. The Unification Church is on its 2nd generation of members, almost 3rd, meaning that children already know who their future spouses will be, as parents who are members of the church and had their own arranged mass weddings years before have found suitable partners for their children within the church. Although Moon is no longer here to match couples, arranged marriages still continue through church members marrying off their own children as young as 15. As more of these 2nd generation members marry, more babies will be born, making up a 3rd generation of the Unification Church. Babies born into the church with bizarre views, never knowing anything different, and without cognitive dissonance, groups of people never knowing a different life of any kind, will mean this cycle may never end. How long can the Moonies go on for? I would like to end with a quote from Reverend Moon. He once said, "The whole world is in my hand, and I will conquer and subjugate the world." If you find yourself in a cult or know someone who might be, please follow the link in the description for more information on how to get advice and support. If you would like to send me an email, you can on cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter @cultvaultpod. Find me on Reddit @cult-vault. Find me on Facebook at The Cult Vault. Find me on YouTube, Tumblr, Instagram @Cult Vault Podcast. I'm Casey, and thank you so much for listening.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.